I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Yogacara Buddhism and trying to put it into some context for us to help us understand what the philosophy of Yogacara is about and how it contributes to Buddhism. After the Buddha passed away into Parinibbana, there was a Buddhist council. And at this Buddhist council, we assume maybe the year 483 or something like that, the group of monastics and arhats got together. The arhats had a conference, and in that conference, they were to hear a recitation of all of the Buddha's suttas. But the person who had memorized all of the Buddhist suttas, Ananda, his assistant, had not yet attained the arhatship. So Mahakassapa said, "Oh, you must right away attain arhatship." So Ananda went into retreat and meditated diligently for several days, and he attained arhatship and then was able to be welcomed into the council when he recited the 84,000 teachings of the Buddha. And then they were assigned, I'm assuming, to different groups of monks to memorize and then to pass those along. And those teachings were, along with the Vinaya that was recited by Upali, this was passed on generation to generation orally for 400 years. Pretty impressive. Wasn't until the fourth council that they were written down on palm leaves. At the second council, this would have been about 383, there was a dispute in the Sangha. One group wanted to change the Vinaya to allow the monks who were already dealing with money. And the other group said, no, we can continue to be limited in that regard. And then there were other silly things that they wanted to put into the Vinaya, like sleeping with blankets that didn't have hems on all four sides. Disputes like this, very silly disputes. And there was a resolution by the elders that favored one group called the Mahasanghikas that wanted to amend this. And then about 30 years, 35 years later, there was another effort to amend things further. And finally, the more orthodox monks, they said, oh no, this is not going to be good. And they left central India and went to Gandhara, near where Pakistan is today, in the upper Indus Valley. The major city at that time was Taxila. That was a big trading hub on the Silk Road. And in this area, they started a new school, actually, that changed names to the Sarvastivadin School. And the Sarvastivadins had they were very analytic and very logical and very precise, but they also had one unusual doctrine, and that was that they believed that the self was empty of inherent existence, but not phenomenon. And so Sarvastivada, actually Sarvasta Asti, was meant objects exist, phenomena exist. And this became troublesome to those who had studied the original teachings of the Buddha, that both the self and objects were empty of inherent existence. And that group left and went south to Sri Lanka and formed the Theravadan community. So the Sarvastivadins continued. They may have actually interacted with Alexander the Great, who came in 326 BCE and had some interactions with his philosophers and the philosophers of the city of Taxila. The king of the city of Taxila, realizing that he could not defeat Alexander the Great, decided to just send a retinue of elephants with jewels and gold, welcoming Alexander the Great. And Alexander, who had been wounded in a previous battle, was grateful that he didn't have to fight another battle at Taxila, and thought the king to be very wise, and asked the king if they could exchange philosophers. Alexander the Great had been a student of Aristotle, so he was very interested in philosophy, so he brought philosophers with him on his journey, and one of his philosophers, his name was Pyrrho. So Pyrrho and met one of the other philosophers from the Indian side. They were called gymnosophists because they didn't wear much clothing. Completely, certainly compared to the Greeks, who had all this armor. And so they interacted with each other, and Pyrrho was very interested and learned from this monk. His name was, they called him Kalanos, although it's very unlikely that that was his name. That was probably the Greek name given to him. Kali, meaning in the language there, meant friend. So he would probably wave to them and say Kali, and that's how he got the name Kalanos. So to make a short story long, they learned from each other, and what Pyrrho learned were the three Dharma seals. All things are by nature impermanent, unsatisfactory, and without self. And he brought that back to Greece, translated it into Greek, and it became a major tenet of a philosophy that he started there called skepticism. Well, that's the beginning of another talk on Greek philosophy. This is all well documented, although people do not seem to understand that it's very likely that Kalanos was Sarvastivadin, or at least versed in Buddhist philosophy. So we see that there was a split, and this split led to changes in Buddhism. And over the years, there were difficulties within the Buddhist schools. And by the time the first to second century CE came along, Buddhism had gone through some difficulties where one set of Buddhists were interested in going to the forest and just meditating by themselves and isolating themselves from humanity, just interested in their own enlightenment. And another group of monks were just scholars that were interested in studying the newly written down sutras. So this was now 14 generations or lineage masters after the Buddha. And at that time, the Buddhism was led by a monk by the name of Nagarjuna. And Nagarjuna saw this difficulty and began to reveal other sutras that had been left in his private collection. This is what the story says. We don't know specifically how Nagarjuna received these, whether they were from some kind of inspiration that he wrote down or whether they were left in some kind of format that he had. In any event, this became known as the beginning of Mahayana Buddhism, the first school of Mahayana. And there were a great number of sutras. Now, the word sutra from the Pali word sutta, the sutra now is a discourse, and these were very long discourses, and we know them now, very famous, the Lotus Sutra, the Prajnaparamita collection of sutras, the Sarangama Sutra, the Avantamsaka Sutra. There are many of these sutras that were written during this time and revealed for people to study. The Maha, Hari, Nirvana Sutra, another one. There were a number of them. So this became a foundation of Indian philosophy and study and practice for the next several hundred years until there were two great masters who in the 4th or early 5th century, we don't know exactly when, developed Yogacara. And this happened as a result of Vasubandhu, who was the 21st of the lineage masters. We have Nagarjuna, who's 14, Vasubandhu 21, and then number 28, who's going to come later, is Bodhidharma, who brings Chan Buddhism to southern China. But here we are in the 400s or 300s, and we have Vasubandhu, who is the head of this school in northern India, and he's so busy, he doesn't really have time to practice. In the meantime, his older brother, Asanga, he decides to go off to the mountains and become enlightened if possible. So he goes there, he's gone for 10 years, he's meditating. The end of 10 years and says, I don't know if I've made any progress. So he decides to go back to where his brother's living. And on the way, he sees a dog on the side of the road. The dog has been injured in his flank, and there are maggots eating the flesh of the dog. And he's moved to such great compassion that he cuts off a piece of his own thigh to flesh for the maggots, and then uses his tongue to scoop out the maggots so that they're not harmed in order to help the dog. And according to the legend, the dog suddenly turns into the Buddha Maitreya and says to Asanga, only a enlightened person or a crazy person would do what you just did. So he transforms himself into the Buddha, and I assume Asanga was healed, and he goes back to see his brother, and he tries to get his brother to talk with him about what it is that he learned. And all this time, Maitreya is dictating to him words for him to write down, and the Sangha can't get his brother to listen because he's too busy. So he says to his brother, I'm sorry, brother, I'm sick, I'm going to die, I need to take to my bed. Well, that got Vasubandhu's attention. And he then says, what can I do for you, brother? He says, well, you can read to me at night these words that have been inspired by Maitreya. So he does that, and after some period of time of listening to all of these teachings, Vasubandhu becomes enlightened as well. So that brings us to the beginning of our story. I only have a little bit of time left. Okay. So that's the origin of the story of Indian Yogacara, Vasubandhu and Asanga. And I'm going to go here. And so we can see here that Asanga, he wrote a text called the Mahayana Samgraha Shastra. This was dictated to him by Maitreya, according to the legend. And as a result of that, Vasubandhu wrote a commentary on this, on the Mahayana Shastra. He also wrote a text called the Dasa Bhumi Shastra on the 10 Bhumi stages of the Bodhisattva. And he also wrote a extensive poem with 36 verses called the Trimsika, among other things. And so these are texts that become part of the Indian Buddhism. So the Mahasangraha Shastra gets translated, and also the Dasabhumi Shastra. This gets translated actually by Buddhabhadra and put into the Vantamsaka Sutra, chapter either 25 or 26, I don't remember. And this becomes a text in and of itself on the 10 Bhumi grounds of the Bodhisattva. This Trimsaka text that he wrote and the commentary on the Mahayana Samgraha Shastra, these books were being translated into Chinese by two people, Bodaruchi and Ratnamati. And they had their own dispute, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then this gets passed down. Asanga's works get passed down and translated by Paramartha, and this gets passed down all the way down to our friend Xuanzhang. So Yogacara, part of it becomes part of what's called the Shilun, the Dharma Characteristic School. So Paramartha, who was a scholar monk, one of the great translators, along with Kumarajiva and Xuanzhang and others, he formulated this text, the Mahayana Samgraha Shastra. It's translated it Shida Shang Lun. So the Shang word here, for those people who are familiar with Chinese, the word for vehicle, actually now in these days is pronounced Chung. So, but in the Tang Dynasty and before that, pronounced Shang. So we'll stick with the original. The treatise on the Mahayana collection. And this gives an overview of most of the most important parts of Yogacara system, the 8 consciousnesses, the meaning of consciousness only, the 3 natures, affliction, 2 hindrances, the Buddha bodies, meditative practices, etc. So this text became very important, but another text was the 30 verses, and this was translated later by Xuanzhang, who's a very well-known person in Chinese history. For if you are a child growing up in China, you become familiar with and perhaps read The Monkey King, which is an apocryphal story of animals kind of acting out the different parts of Xuanzhang's um, journey, very dangerous journey from China to Nalanda in northern India. Yeah. There is an actual story. Xuanzhang actually kept a journal of this, and it's also available in translation. But the easiest version to read is by Sally Riggins. She's done a very good job of being able to simplify and amplify the different parts of Xuanzhang's journey. At first, Xuanzhang wanted to go on this journey to answer a question that he had: if there's no self, what goes from life to life? And he didn't get a very good answer from anyone. So he wrote a letter to the emperor, Taizong, saying, may I please go to Nalanda? And the emperor said, no, it's too dangerous. You're not allowed to go. Western lands are too dangerous. So then a year later, Xuanzhang wrote another letter and it didn't get any answer at all. So he said, well, I guess I can go. He just left and he went there. And indeed, it was a very dangerous journey. He was attacked by bandits. He run out of water and food. He was kidnapped by a king who said that he couldn't leave unless he came back and agreed to teach for 3 years. There were many, many trials and tribulations. At that time, at Nalanda, there was a great monk, Silabhadra, who was 106 years old, who was looking forward to passing on. So he told his disciples, he said, and tomorrow morning you'll come into my room, you'll find my poem on the bedstand here, and I will be gone. Please don't be concerned. So the next morning, the monks came in expecting to see the poem, and what they saw was Silabhadra sitting up in his bed. What's going on? You were supposed to pass away. He said, well, last night I had a dream that there was a great teacher from China who was coming here, and I have to stay to greet him. So he said, please send out a retinue of elephants to bring him to Nalanda. We'll have a big parade and celebration. And indeed, they found him and brought him in to Nalanda, and they had the celebration. And then Silabhadra said, well, this is great. I can die now. And Xuanzhang said, please, not so quick, fast. You need to teach me first. So indeed, he stayed for another number of years teaching Xuanzhang, helping him to understand Vasubandhu's teachings. And so Xuanzhang brought back on elephants over almost 600 scrolls back to China. He fully expected to be put in jail when he arrived back because he left without the permission. But in fact, the emperor said, no, this is fine. We will set up a translation center for you in Chang'an, the capital city. Now modern day Xi'an, where the terracotta warriors are. So they set up a goose pavilion, it's called, the name of the pavilion. And there's a translation center, and they had other people there who had learned Sanskrit, and they began translating these 30 verses and making a commentary. So when he came back, he brought with him 10 commentaries on these 30 verses. And Xuanzhang wanted to only publish one, the most profound by Dharmapala, which studied with someone under Vasubandhu, so direct lineage. And so But Kuei-ji, his assistant, said, no, we should do all 10. So they translated this whole text called the Xiankuan, very big text. You should know at that time the character for consciousness, shi, was a fourth tone, but now it's shi, second tone. We changed it. But we'll use the Tang Dynasty version since we're talking about the Tang Dynasty here. So what Xuanzhang brought back was in direct contrast to what Paramatha had been teaching and his students had been teaching, which was that there were 9 consciousnesses, that the eighth consciousness, the Alaya Vijnana, which contains the seeds, the karmic seeds, could not be the ultimate consciousness because it contained defilements. Some of the seeds are defiled. There are 4 types of seeds. There are unwholesome or defiled seeds. There are wholesome seeds. There are indeterminate seeds. That's very important because if you don't have indeterminate seeds, you can't change the ratio, can't make progress. And then finally, there's the Buddha nature seed. So these 4 seed families all exist in the Alaya Vijnana. This is the karmic seed. They become perfumed, and then they have an impact on the other layers of consciousness, the other 7 levels of consciousness. And Paramatha said, no, this can't be true. His disciple said, no, you have to have one pure consciousness. And he called it the Amala Vijnana. So this was a dispute that came about. And I'm going to give you a little taste of the 30 verses so that you can see what Xuanzhang's version looked like. The concepts of the Atman is the self, and the dharmas, in this case, the phenomenon, do not imply the existence of a real Atman and real dharmas. You can see already they're diverging from the Sarvastivadins, but are merely fictitious constructions produced by numerous causes. Because of this, all varieties of phenomenal appearances and qualities arise. The phenomenon of Atman and Dharmas are all mental representations based on the manifestation and transformation of consciousness. Consciousness is capable of unfolding a manifest. So this is one of the verses. Let's go to verse number 4, which is also quite interesting, that responds to this. So this translation is by Wei Tat, who was a Taiwanese, maybe Hong Kong-based translator during our time, the 20th century. His text of the Changwei Shulan is very good because on one side you have the Chinese and then you have this English translation on the other side, and also he also has a Sanskrit as well. So you can really compare them. So the storehouse consciousness this is the Alaya Vijnana, this belongs to the non-defiled, non-defined moral species. So here this is a very clear poke at Paramatha's view. The same is true in the case of mental contact, sparsa, and so forth. So he's talking about here the second group of mental factors that have to do with how the mind apprehends dharmas, apprehends phenomenon. So that would include contact, feeling, discrimination, attention, and intention. Those are the 5. So this storehouse consciousness is perpetually manifesting itself like a torrent. I really like this word torrent. In the Chinese, it's a picture of um, a gorge, and the person is going down the gorge and they're bobbing up and down, almost unable to breathe. This is the torrent. I don't know if you were in St. Louis yesterday, but I was driving against my wife's permission through a torrent. We had 2.5, almost 2.5 inches of rain in less than an hour yesterday. Did you get rain where you were? A big torrent?
Yeah, not very much.
Did you have a torrent here? I heard Washington didn't get any water, anything. So I was in a torrent, but fortunately I wasn't bobbing up and down in the gorge. Although there was a lot of water. So the mind is like this. It's just being driven down a torrent of concerns, worries, and distress and desires. And this is eventually renounced, ceases to be called Alaya when a person reaches arhatship. So when a person becomes arhat, they no longer have any karma, they don't have karmic seeds, and the Alaya doesn't have to be there. The storehouse, in this view, is like a container. The container is not affected by the moral quality of the seeds. The seeds are there. They're being passed on to the other levels of consciousness, but the container itself is non-defiled and not defined. In other words, the container is neither positive seeds or negative seeds or Buddha nature seeds, it's just a container. This is what is said in this verse. So this is how Yogacara came to China, and also the translation of these other texts by Ratnamati and Bodaruchi brought the Dasabhumi Sutra, Shastra, into Chinese. And Bodaruchi and Ratnamati had a conflict. And so they split from each other. Bodaruchi was basically saying that the Buddha nature seed doesn't exist, is something that to get more into this. Ratnamati, they had disagreements regarding Buddha nature in this Tilun school. Yeah, Bodaruchi believed that the Alaya Vijnana was not real, and the Buddha nature arises only upon the attainment of Buddhahood. Whereas Ratnamati believed that the container indeed is there, and that the Buddha nature is innate in all beings. And this becomes a matter of dispute that continues throughout Buddhism, whether or not there are people who are incorrigible or not. So I'll tell one more story. I've told the story before, but it's good to hear the story again, maybe. So at the time of Kumarajiva, another great translator, they're working on a translation of the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. And they're having a dispute then about whether or not everybody has Buddha nature. And the monks are saying, no, there are these incorrigibles. Tinka, I think it's Ichatika, something like that. They're incorrigible, they're not capable of attaining Buddhahood. That's the way that it is. And then there was one monk, Daoshan, who said, no, everybody has Buddha nature. All sentient beings have Buddha nature. There's no such thing as an incorrigible. Well, the other monks got tired of his arguing about this and they dismissed him from the Sangha. They kicked him out. And he went up into the mountains and there was nobody to talk to, so he gave Dharma talks to the rocks. And apparently his Dharma talks were so profound, one day a rock cracked open. So he became known as Dao Shan, who could crack open rocks with his words. Well, they got a new translation of a Sanskrit version of the Mahaparinibbana Sutra, and when they started to translate that, it said clearly in the text, there's all sentient beings have Buddha nature. When they realized their mistake, they went and they got Dao Shan from the mountains and brought him back. And Dao Shan continued to help them with the translation. He had no resentment and no anger. He was a very well-practiced monk. So, however, during this time, the southern and the northern split off of each other previously, and that's a story for another talk. And how actually, when you look at Yogacara, there are 6 different versions of Yogacara. You have the Paramatha version, the Vasubandhu version, you have the Bodhirichi northern Dilan, southern Dilan, then we get the Xuanzhang's version, which I call Weishe. The scholars call it Faxian. I don't like this because I reserve the Faxian for the next version, which is Kueji, who actually changes things around back again and creates his own version. So actually 6 different levels of understanding. So another time, perhaps I will give more information about this, but it's good to see that there's so much debate about this topic and we can understand the different stories. So I hope that you find this interesting. I like the history of how things come to be. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be separated from the altruistic joy which is free from suffering. And may all beings dwell in the great equanimity which is free from attachment, aversion, ignorance, and delusion, and defilements, all of those things. Thank you all very much.